So you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. Once again, I am covering Bodie Hodge giving a speech for AIG, who as we all know, are a bag of dicks, because they will almost certainly fraudulently copyright claim this video. So I'll ask you up front that you please hit like, leave a comment, and share the video, because while it is under copyright strike, it will not be doing well in the algorithm. When last we heard from Mr. Hodge, he was trying to tell us how Christianity invented the weekend, which is only kind of true, as some kind of evidence for how great Genesis is. Since the creation narrative of Genesis 1 contains an ideology for the day of rest as practiced by Second Temple Jews and modern Jews, as well as some Christians, like Seventh-day Adventists, although not the kind of Christians that Bodie Hodge is, so that's weird. Next up, he's going to tell us how the creation was perfect before the fall of Adam and Eve.
Deuteronomy 32:4 says, every work of God is perfect. We expected the work of creation to be perfect.
You know, if it were perfect, it wouldn't have gone wrong. Whether you put the blame on the humans, the snake without conflating it with the antiquity character of Satan, or if you do think the snake was Satan, God created every character but himself in that story, and if they were perfect, they wouldn't have screwed it all up. Maybe this is a reason to take the story as more of an ideological metaphor and not as literal history.
At the end of the creation week, Genesis 1:31, God declared everything that he'd made very good. It really was. Try to imagine that for a second. A world with no death, no bloodshed, no suffering. Hey kids, no homework.
A world with no death would be a world with no heterotrophs, because heterotrophs gain sustenance through digesting other living or formerly living things. Humans are heterotrophs, so such a world couldn't have humans, or if it did, the humans would have to not eat. Genesis 2 says that humans were given various plants to eat, so it certainly wasn't a deathless world. Maybe humans didn't die, but at least plants did, and there's no reason to think animals wouldn't, especially since if they could reproduce but not die, the world would fill in short order with things like ants and mice.
Men, no baldness.
Or maybe no body shaming about harmless aesthetic variation like baldness or skin color would be perfect, rather than not having baldness.
Perfect world, I'm telling you. But all that changed. Adam and Eve sinned against God. They elevated their own thoughts to supersede what God had said about a fruit. God said not to eat it, they ate it anyway. They defied God. God cursed the ground. He cursed the animals. He sentenced man to die. The world went from a perfect state to an imperfect and broken state. You see, they had dominion over the world, so when they fell, their whole dominion fell. That's why we need a new heavens and a new earth. That's why we need a Savior to save us from sin and death.
Okay, man, get to the dinosaurs, because, in case you didn't know, this whole talk is supposed to be about dinosaurs.
Then we have the catastrophe, the flood of Noah's day, which accounts for most of the rock layers that contain fossils.
Except that those rock layers contain things like non-flocculated shale, siltstone, limestone, salt evaporites, etc. that can't be deposited during a global flood. And instead, most of it is completely consistent with modern depositional environments like rivers, lakes, swamps, seas, and deserts.
We've had some fossil layers since the time of the flood, but most are from the flood of Noah's day. And then we have the confusion at the Tower of Babel.
Okay, let's cut until we get to dinosaurs.
We're going to use some of these C's history when we look at dinosaurs from time to time, see what the world has to say with regards to certain questions. So from here on out, I've got common questions that people ask me about dinosaurs all the time. So are you guys ready to jump into those questions?
Yes, I've been ready and waiting this whole time. Finally.
We got about 6 excited people here today. You guys ready to jump into these questions? All right. What day did God make T-Rex? Let's think.
Well, the Bible doesn't mention Tyrannosaurus Rex, so it doesn't really say. But Genesis does say that the land animals were made on day 6. So if I had to shoehorn a T-Rex into the Bible, I'd say day 6.
I hear some 6. I hear some mumbling. All right, T-Rex is a land animal, right? We've seen his footprints on land. It seems very well designed to be a land creature. All right, let's go back to the Bible.
Well, according to Kent Hovind, T-Rex is probably Leviathan, so he seems to think it was aquatic, but that's too dumb even for Bodie, so let's ignore it.
Genesis 1:25. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. This is part of the 6th day of creation. That was the day that God made land animals. So beasts of the earth, that includes dinosaurs. So T-Rex is a land animal. Land animals were made on day 6. What day was T-Rex made? Day 6. There you have it. All right, what do you think that T-Rex originally ate?
Meat. The size of the gut and the teeth and any lack of gastroliths associated with T-Rex means that T-Rex was physically incapable of processing plant matter to sustain itself. especially given its size. Plant matter is hard for animals to digest and requires that the plant matter be thoroughly ground into a paste in most cases, and that it then be digested slowly. Even then, many herbivores manage to extract only a tiny fraction of the nutrients in plant matter. It is not really very hard to look at a skeleton of an animal and determine its primary diet. Now, this is not to say that T-Rex never intentionally ingested plant matter, but it simply could not have ever been its majority or exclusive source of nutrition and calories.
I hear. Did you guys walk through the museum already? No? Okay. Thought you guys were cheating there for a second. Look at this vicious-looking T-Rex. Look at those mean-looking teeth. Those mean-looking claws. Well, not those. Those aren't that scary. Oh, I'm going to get you.
T-Rex arms are about the same size as those of a large adult human male. They were well-muscled, and T-Rex almost certainly had stronger arms than you do. I am very confident that one could kill a human using nothing but its arms.
What's he use those little arms for?
Prey restraint, rising from a prone position, or holding onto a mate during copulation, or perhaps only some of those. But those are the most common hypotheses.
These others are scary. You think that was on the menu?
If that's meant to be an actual steak from a steer, then no. But if it's just generic meat, then yes.
What about that?
Nope, while it is true that the pictured plant matter is all fruit, the easiest part of any plant to digest, there is no possibility for T-Rex to grind any of that fruit to the point it could get enough calories to survive from simply eating fruit.
All right, let's go back to the Bible. Genesis 1, verse 30. Also to every beast of the earth, that includes dinosaurs, to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth in which there is life, I've given every green herb for food, and it was so.
Cool, well, the actual empirical evidence is that many organisms simply cannot survive on plants, so the conclusion to be reached here is that this interpretation of the Bible, or just the Bible, is wrong. Remember, the Bible is not prior to reality. Reality predates the Bible, even in the Bible's interior narrative. Without reality, there would be no Bible, and without the Bible, reality would keep on going without even noticing, as it did before the Bible existed. Reality must be the standard by which the Bible and biblical interpretation is assessed. If reality conflicts with anything, then the thing that it conflicts with is false, whether it be Genesis or your favorite mystery story. Calling reality man's theories doesn't change this.
So originally, that T-Rex was a vegetarian. And this makes sense.
As long as you never think about it.
This is a God of life. He made a world full of life, not a world full of death.
Life and death are basically two sides of the same coin. It's not clear that life can even exist without death. Death is basically what happens when an organism can no longer maintain thermodynamic disequilibrium with its environment. What would have prevented this before the fall? And if you say that the second law just wouldn't exist, remember the second law is what allows digestion in the first place. So if there's no second law, then T-Rex couldn't eat at all, never mind what it ate.
So originally, yes, they were vegetarian. I've had people say, but we found some T-Rexes, though, that have stomach contents in there. They did start to eat meat at some point. So what event in Bible history changed all that to where death and suffering came into the world? Sin and the fall.
So we have evidence of meat eating, and none of plant eating, and remember, the Bible is not prior to reality. The Bible can be construed as making the claim that T-Rex was alive 6,000 years ago and ate plants, but there's no evidence of that. There's only evidence that it died out about 66 million years ago, and that it ate meat almost exclusively.
Now, I want to put this illustration up. This is from one of our old children's books, and I love to use this to dispel a myth. Have you guys ever heard Adam and Eve ate an apple?
Yes, and nowhere does the Genesis account identify the fruit. Bodie and I agree on this, and it's irrelevant, so I'm skipping until more dinosaurs.
But no, people have asked a really good question, though. They said that T-Rex, it did have sharp teeth. It did have some pretty vicious claws. In fact, a lot of animals have what we call defense or attack structures.
Which are totally necessary in a deathless, no-predation world.
For example, this turtle has a shell to help protect itself from being eaten. That's a protective structure. You see the talons on an eagle seem really well designed to go down and grab a fish out of the sea or a rabbit out of the meadow. And then you see this alligator. I actually took that picture of an alligator. I just got right up there. I'm like, yeah, I would never do it again. Look at him looking at me. But he has a very powerful jaw, sharp teeth.
Yep, alligators are not to be trifled with.
Alligators are dinosaurs, Dwight. You know that, right?
It's complicated.
Seemed very well designed to go out and kill and eat other things. So people said, hey, if the world was very good, all these animals were originally vegetarian, why do we see design features like this? There's actually two different biblical viewpoints on this.
I'll bet neither of them is based on an actual verse in the Bible or on physical evidence.
The first, that the original design was used to eat vegetarian foods, or simply put, utilized for a different purpose.
Well, we know for a fact that that's physically impossible in many cases, so that's not it. And also, yeah, there's no verse that actually says that this is how it worked. This is something that has to be read into the text.
For example, T-Rex, right through your watermelon patch. Doesn't matter if you've been watering that thing all summer. Boom, there they go.
Ignoring that watermelons as we know them today are a very recent innovation, T-Rex has no way to process watermelon effectively. There's no way for it to grind the melon down so that more than a bit of water and sugar could be absorbed by its digestive tract. Try this at home sometime, but be careful. Pull out a few steak knives and get a small watermelon. Now try to eat the watermelon without touching it with your hands or teeth, but you're allowed to use the steak knives. See how well that goes for you.
Oh, but Bodie's got sharp teeth. That means it's a meat eater, right? Nope. Sharp teeth mean one thing. It just means it has sharp teeth.
Teeth are the primary food processing structure in virtually every animal that has them. In mammals, who have heterodont dentition, there can be a variety of tooth shapes for different jobs. Like an herbivore with flat grinding molars but sharp canines for defense and competition in intraspecific dominance disputes or the like. Reptiles, though, have homodont dentition, with extremely few exceptions, like Heterodontosaurus. This means that all of their teeth have the same basic shape, varying mostly in size throughout the jaw. So while in mammals, sharp teeth often coexist with flat grinding teeth, meaning that in mammals, simply noting that an animal has sharp teeth doesn't do enough to tell you about its diet, looking at its molars does tell you about its diet. And further in reptiles, sharp recurved serrated teeth really can only mean one thing: eating meat. In contrast, animals like sauropods have blunt peg-like teeth for stripping leaves off of branches, and animals like ceratopsians have batteries of blunt, closely packed teeth for grinding up plant matter. And this corresponds well to what we actually find preserved as stomach contents for these animals. This is confirmation that scientists can indeed successfully infer diet from dentition, and I suspect Bodie knows this.
That's all that means. Remember that. There's a lot of animals that have sharp teeth that don't necessarily eat meat. There's some animals with some pretty dull teeth that do.
I would love it if Bodie gave some actual examples in which, after taking into account the difference between heterodont and homodont dentition, there are some animals whose regular diet is contraindicated by their dentition. So far, I've yet to see one. There are some animals with intermediate dentition that are omnivores, but I don't think that's what we'd need to see. I wonder if Bodie will give examples.
For example, cats can have a diet that's almost 100% meat, very sharp teeth, and yet there's been some lions that were documented that refused to eat meat. One of them over here was in a reserve. All would eat was spaghetti.
Little Tyke is a famous example of an alleged lion that would not eat meat, but the only sources I can find on it are in vegan outlets and creationist publications that are basing their reports on the vegan sources. There are no independent sources for this that I can find, and given that actual studies on vegan and vegetarian diets in felines that are published in actual peer-reviewed journals show universally negative health outcomes for the animals in question, I personally think that Little Tyke is probably either entirely fictional, or the story is grossly exaggerated based on a lion that ate a partially plant-based diet.
Gosh, get that rabbit out of here. I want my spaghetti. Pandas have really sharp teeth, but what do they eat?
Pandas have sharp canines and incisors, but here's a picture of panda molars. Notice how they're not sharp triangular shearing teeth like those of a wolf or lion. They're flat grinding teeth, the kind that indicate a mostly vegetable diet. And indeed, pandas get nearly all of their nutrition from bamboo, although they do very rarely hunt small animals and will eat meat if presented with it.
That's right. They use those sharp teeth to tear right through that. Have you ever seen those really vicious-looking claws on a squirrel?
Claws are not generally for processing food, but for locomotion, defense, and for food gathering. As a result, they are generally not diagnostic in regards to diet.
Yeah, what do squirrels use those claws for?
Climbing, digging, self-defense, and in males, fighting over mates.
Climbing trees, holding nuts.
The holding nuts thing is more of a toe pad function, but this is a fairly minor point, so I won't belabor it.
Unless you grab one.
Then it's self-defense.
They know to only use their weapons for defense.
I grew up on a farm in western Illinois. I made the mistake of grabbing a squirrel one time. I have never done it since. That thing is vicious. They're cute, but don't grab them.
Generally, good advice for wildlife in general. Observe from a distance. Don't touch. And yes, I say this as someone who has caught lizards, snakes, and various arthropods and worms. It's still better for the animals involved not to be handled.
The second biblical viewpoint is there may have been some design changes at the fall of man. Right there in Genesis chapter 3, when Adam and Eve sinned against God, there were curses called down. Things changed.
Cool, so we should expect some kind of evidence of flat-toothed T-Rex then. And just get that fossil and we're in business. Until then, this is just a post hoc rationalization to keep a particular interpretation of the Bible intact, and one with no evidence for it.
That serpent, remember that serpent?
Yes, I do remember the serpent.
The serpent was being influenced by Satan. It was a real serpent.
Demonically oppressed danger noodle is a new one for me, but sure, let's go with that one.
But Satan influenced it. That's where the cleverness came from in that deception. Because the Lord God said to the serpent, because you've done this, you are cursed more than all cattle and more than all beasts of the field.
So Satan takes over a dumb brute animal, makes it talk despite not having the anatomy to do so, and it's the animal's fault? And remember, if we're to take this story literally, God made Satan knowing he'd do this, and made the snake able to be controlled, and made the humans both without the ability to know this was wrong, and with the ability to be tempted by the fruit anyway. How in the world does anyone take this story literally and then come to the conclusion that the moronic God in it is worth worshipping? If this story is to be taken literally, then I think the idolaters the Bible is always complaining about may have had it right. At least their stone and wooden statues weren't going around making dumb decisions like the God of a literal Genesis 2 and then blaming innocent animals for their own mistakes. Also, snakes are doing pretty damn well, so I'm not sure how much of a curse was placed on them.
On your belly you'll go, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life.
See, if we take that literally, then we should expect to see snakes eating dust. But they don't. And I would love to see why we need to take the part about the talking literally. But not this bit. Or for that matter, the bit about the floodgates of heaven later on in Genesis that we read about in the Great Flood of Noah story.
Most commentators think that serpent physically changed forms to be at a lower position. This is called cursed design. Now, he's cursed more than the other animals.
So cursed that snakes now live on every continent but Antarctica, and have more than 3,000 species, many of which are under no threat of extinction. I still feel like myself and people who take this literally have very different definitions of the word cursed. If anything, I think any of the animals that AIG think were on the ark, only to immediately go extinct, were cursed. If snakes are the most cursed, then what was the curse status of Cotylarhynchus? What did this beautiful child do to deserve extinction when the most cursed beast is going from strength to strength around the world?
Well, how are these other animals cursed? Was this one sharp teeth, claws, things like that came about to help them survive in a sin-cursed and broken world now? It's possible.
Is such a thing even possible? Yes, it is.
We leave that option open. Look at the parallel things going on in here. To the woman, to Eve, pain and sorrows and childbearing. Ladies, is this true?
So before the fall, did humans all have tiny heads? Or did women have gigantic hips? Because the pain comes from trying to fit that giant human baby noggin through the pelvis. So what were the humans like before the fall to make that experience a breeze?
Yes. My wife has given birth 4 times. You ladies are incredible. But notice that's a physical change that's been passed along.
Just not one we're getting any details on. Probably because if you think about it for more than 5 seconds, you'll see why this becomes silly if you take it literally, rather than taking it as an ideological myth. Which it is.
What about to the man, to Adam? Cursed is the ground because of man, both thorns and thistles shall it bring forth unto thee. There is a physical change going on to the vegetation.
Who kept their phone on? That's just rude. Anyway, thorns are an adaptation of plants to not being eaten by animals, and animals were apparently eating plants before the fall, so there's no reason for thorns to not exist. And even if they didn't, they would have evolved, curse or no.
And I know there's variations in these types of models as well, but just think about this. In a perfect world, kids, let me ask you this. In a perfect world, could you pet the skunks and play with the beehives? What do you think?
I don't know, because I don't really have a good definition for perfect in this context. But technically, you can play with beehives and pet skunks now. In fact, tame skunks can be quite affectionate, and European honeybees are actually not very aggressive. But this is a behavioral change, not a change to gross anatomy, as would be required to make T-Rex an herbivore.
Yeah, you shouldn't have had a problem. I wonder how long it took them to realize you don't do that anymore.
I'll admit, the cartoon is a bit amusing.
But think about this. Adam and Eve, they started out in a perfect world, and they had to adjust to a sin-cursed and broken world. We've lived in a sin-cursed and broken world our whole life. It's tough for us to imagine what a perfect world would really be like.
Especially when those who believe in that world have no evidence for it, or even a coherent model of how it could possibly function.
Now, like I said, I'd leave either of these options open. I know there's variations in these models. Could be a combination of the two even.
Yeah, or it could just be neither, since there's no evidence for either, and there's good evidence the whole story isn't a thing that literally happened.
All right, here's the easy question. You already answered it. Were dinosaurs on Noah's Ark?
No, there was never any such vessel for any animal to be on.
Yes. I remember years ago when I would ask that question, people never really thought about that. But once we opened the Ark encounter, everybody gets that one right now.
Good to know that the multi-million-dollar propaganda machine is working.
Genesis 6:20. Of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind. That includes dinosaurs here.
Yes, birds are indeed dinosaurs.
And of every creeping thing, this is in the context of earth-dwelling creatures after its kind.
By the way, the creeping thing category includes things like insects and snails, which according to AIG weren't on the Ark. But Genesis definitely says that they were, so once again, we have them simply interpreting away the plain meaning of the text, where they find it to be too absurd for them to accept. It's almost like they are basing their interpretations just as much on the mind of man as anyone at Biologos is. It's just that Biologos doesn't bother denying science, whereas AIG does.
2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. So yeah, 2 of each of the dinosaur kinds would have been on board Noah's Ark. So how many kinds needed to be on Noah's Ark? That's more the interesting question now.
All right, everybody, say it with me. What's a kind? We'll never get a good definition that's falsifiable, will we?
For a long time, creationists said there was about 50 different kinds of dinosaurs.
If you say so, I never seem to get a straight answer on that.
Now, I'm going to introduce you to this term kind.
Oh, Bodie, you sweet summer child. I'm very familiar with that term.
It's the Hebrew word mean. It's kind of like a sort or a kind.
Translated into species in Latin, and our modern conception of species has traditionally been the idea thought of in reference to this term in the Bible. Until, of course, creationists in the 20th century realized that there was no way to fit that many species on the ark. So they had to once again use the mind of man to reinterpret the word of God so that it could make at least a modicum of sense.
A good rule of thumb is if things can interbreed together, they're part of the same kind here.
Yeah, but the problem is that AIG thinks of many groups that can't all interbreed as being the same kind. So we have a way with this to answer yes to the question, are organisms A and B in the same kind? But no way to answer no, and the no is the more important one. Science needs falsifiability. If you can't know that you're wrong, there's no reason for anyone to think that you're right. With the criteria that reproductive compatibility is a positive indication of common ancestry, but a lack of any criteria to show that there is no common ancestry, it means that the answer to are humans in the same kind as chimps is not no, it's just maybe. But even more extreme, the answer to are humans in the same kind as dandelions is also maybe. That's why this is not a sufficient definition of what a kind is. It also doesn't apply at all to asexual species, which is a bit of a problem.
Do you guys like dogs?
Dogs. You like dogs?
Yeah, I like dogs.
Oh, dogs. Sure. I like dogs.
Is there variation in dogs?
There is more morphological variation in dogs than in any wild mammal family, let alone species, and this is because humans have steered the evolution of various dogs.
Yeah, we see a lot of variation in dogs, but there's only one dog kind.
How do you know? Is the kind restricted to the genus Canis, where hybrids are well known? Are animals like Lycaon or Vulpes part of the same kind? What about Kuon and Nycteroitus? They can't interbreed with members of genus Canis. Are they in different kinds? How could we tell? We can't.
Noah only required 2 dogs on board the ark. All the dogs we have today are the descendants of those 2 dogs. We get tall dogs, short dogs, skinny dogs, wide dogs. They're still dogs. Long snouts, long ears, shaggy ones. Like there's several different wolf species and coyote species and dingoes, domestic dogs. Even though we have a multitude of species of dogs, they're actually considered one kind. They can all ultimately interbreed with each other.
Yeah, but what about the canines that can't? That's the important thing. If they're in the same kind as wolves, how could you tell? And if they're not, how could we tell? It's been more than half a century now, and no one has yet to come up with a way to test for kinds that can give a firm not the same kind answer. It's almost like this concept doesn't actually correspond to anything in reality, and is just a made-up thing that is used as a way to let creationists accept the evolution they can't deny, while denying the evolution they can't accept. All while pretending this makes Noah's Ark viable.
So yes, you can have variations within this dog kind. And we see filterings.
Filterings? Is that some new way to say natural selection without saying natural selection?
But these dogs are still dogs. Dingoes have lost the information for long hair. Collies have lost the information for short hair.
Ah yes, information, another buzzword that creationists have never defined in a useful way in regards to organisms. They'll just say that obviously one organism has more or less information than another, but they never disclose how they measured that. They'll also simply assert that mutations always reduce the information content of the genome, which is mathematically impossible under any conceivable definition of mutation, so that's fun. Really, the word Bodie is looking for is alleles. Dingoes don't have long coat alleles, and collies don't have short coat alleles.
Chihuahuas just lost a lot of information altogether. They look like rats, and in Hollywood they put clothes on them, but they are still dogs. Actually, they're cute little dogs.
See, he says this like it's a joke, but there are also no other criteria he's given to allow us to say what organisms have more or less information than others. So maybe it's just physical size. I guess this means that blue whales have more information than any other animal, and that the Etruscan shrew has less information than all other mammals. But this leads us to some rather unsavory places. Does Shaquille O'Neal have more information than Peter Dinklage? Could you tell this by doing a DNA test? And further, humans can breed dogs to be bigger. The Irish Wolfhound is the largest dog breed and is larger than its wolf ancestors by a significant margin. Does that mean that human breeders added information to it? How did they do that? Did it require a miracle? Again, we get to a concept in creationism that only makes sense if you avoid thinking about it for any time at all. Or maybe Bodie is in fact racist enough to think that smaller groups of humans have less information. So, sorry Japanese people, but you just don't have the information present in, say, Scandinavian people. That's just how it works in Bodie's world.
But when it comes to things like dinosaurs, they're not around. We can't see what interbreeds with each other. We think they've gone extinct. We can't find them anymore.
Even if we had them around, we couldn't tell anyway, because we don't have an even proposed criterion for a return of a no answer when we query if two organisms are in the same kind. And notice that Bodie still hasn't addressed whether other genera of canines that can't interbreed with the members of genus Canis are in the same kind.
So what we have to do, we look at what scientists call a cognitum level. Do they look similar enough to be within these variations?
That is not what scientists do, because cognitum is just, eyeball it. You'll know it if you see it. Taxonomy doesn't operate under the rules of recognizing pornography. There are careful measurements taken of anatomical features, exacting definitions formed, genetic analysis undertaken. Only creationists who manifestly couldn't give two shits about science would ever dream of just kinda eyeballing it and calling it good enough to print. The cognitum is perhaps the most pseudoscientific thing I've ever encountered, perhaps other than flat earthers dropping objects in a tank of water to somehow disprove gravity.
It's a feather, bowling ball, or anything else inside a vacuum chamber is infinitely denser than empty space, which has a density of 0. It all falls at the same rate of 9.81 meters per second squared.
But it's actually more pseudoscientific than much of what we see flat earthers do. This shit is why I say that there's really no difference in terms of scientific value or intellectual integrity between young earthers and flat earthers. The only real difference is how long we've known they're wrong and how much funding they get. At least flat earthers can be more consistent in their plain reading of scripture hermeneutic.
For example, there's a ceratopsian kind, we believe.
So that's including Ceratopsidae and Leptoceratopsidae. But the kinds list that's printed at the Ark Encounter, which was compiled very helpfully by Gutsick Gibbon, lists Leptoceratopsidae as a separate kind along with Ceratopsidae, Archaeoceratopsidae, Bacoceratopsidae, and Protoceratopsidae. So which is it? Has AIG revised their kind list? What made them confident before that Ceratopsia actually had 5 kinds, but now apparently it's only 1 kind, or at most 4 kinds, since the slide includes Leptoceratops? What can we use to distinguish between these different ideas about kinds within Ceratopsia? Other than, of course, what would allow for more room on the Ark, because let's be honest, that's mostly what this kind nonsense is about. It has nothing to do with actually finding out what's going on in reality with organisms. It's about somehow shoving all the animals onto the Ark. An Ark which is basically plasma, because remember, all young Earth creationist flood models produce more than enough heat to turn the Earth into an exploding ball of plasma.
It has Triceratops, Penosaurus, Torosaurus, and these are just different members of that same kind with that same type of variation, like what you'd see with the dogs. So Noah would have only required 2 of the Ceratopsians on board Noah's Ark. Same sort of thing with the sauropod kind. We see a lot of these variations of long neck, long tail type of sauropods.
That's an even wider group than Ceratopsians. That's a group that's more like all carnivore mammals. There is a huge diversity within sauropods. It includes families like Cetiosauridae, Brachiosauridae, Camarasauridae, Diplodoctidae, Mamenchisauridae, Robacosauridae, Dicraeosauridae, and Titanosauridae. If that much diversity is allowed, then sorry to tell you, but there is absolutely no reason to keep humans out of the wider primate kind, and there really should be only 1 kind in all of primates. This is absolutely absurd and can only be countenanced by someone who is profoundly ignorant of the reality of non-avian dinosaur diversity.
These are likely just 1 kind of dinosaur. And just to give you a size comparison, those things are huge. Here's it is compared to an African elephant or to a human. They are pretty good sized creatures. So we work with researchers to look at how many different kinds of dinosaurs there were, and they gave us a range.
Ah, working with researchers, eh? I'm going to press X to doubt. This sounds like when ancient aliens say, some researchers believe. I've seen the kind of paleontology AIG can put forward. In fact, I did a review of one of their most recent dinosaur papers, and it was atrocious. It displayed an inability on the part of their in-house paleontologist, Gabriella Haynes, to even read a basic cladogram, and her willingness to cite works either dishonestly or without checking them, which is just a different kind of dishonesty. When Bodie says AIG worked with experts, what I hear is that they sat around with their thumbs up their spitballing ideas that seemed to be good enough for space considerations on the Ark, but also not so silly that their ignorant audience, whom they work to keep ignorant, would balk.
The maximum was about 85 kinds, and that's what we publish at the Ark Encounter because we were trying to maximize the number, but the minimum number is 36, so that 50 number was right there within that particular range. But this translates to as low as 72 individuals up to a maximum of 170 individuals. And if you take the smaller ones, the juveniles on board the Ark, they easily fit on board the Ark.
And there it is. He said the quiet part loud. This isn't about getting to the facts of biology. It's just a rescuing device for the Ark. This is how you go about doing world building for your speculative fiction story, not how you go about doing science.
All right, here's an easy question for you. What happened to the dinosaurs during the flood that were not on Noah's Ark?
Same thing that happened to the dinosaurs on Xenu's DC-10 spaceships after he blew up all the Thetans. Nothing. Because it never happened.
They died. That's what the Bible says. All that was on dry land died. I have a picture of it. You want to see?
No, I don't want to see a picture of Bodie's concept of the worst instance of mass murder imaginable. Why would anyone want to see that? Bodie can keep that locked up in his apparently sociopathic mind where killing every land animal and baby is a good thing for a loving God to have done. I don't care if it's realistic or cutesy like the rest of the images so far. It's disgusting, it doesn't need to be in my audience's heads, plus I don't want to be on the hook for eye bleach for all of you watching.
No, you're just from kids' books. I absolutely love these types of things, but...
Bodie, if you ever watch this, you are in desperate need of psychological care if you love pictures of global genocide.
Yeah, you know, we find a lot of dinosaur graveyards where these things were fleeing, trying to get to higher ground, and sooner or later the waters take them, wash them into place.
Ah, nice picture of someone working on a Camarasaurus fossil in the alluvial sandstone of the Dinosaur National Monument in Utah. Except, oh wait, it's alluvial sandstone. That is, sandstone deposited by a river, usually near its mouth, with no evidence of catastrophism. So then, how did this dinosaur graveyard come to be? Easy. The area was at the end of a drainage system of rivers, which means dead things from upstream got washed downstream. All the creationists need to do is just do some sedimentation experiments to show how sandstone entirely identical to alluvian sandstone can form in a high-energy flood. But, oddly enough, creationist flood sedimentology experiments aren't exactly thick on the ground. Until they do those experiments, though, this sandstone is in fact a refutation of the flood, not evidence for it. Also, the original picture is kind of green-tinted. I wonder why they messed up the color to make it red. It sure doesn't make it harder to source, as it was on the first page of visually similar images on Google Images when I did a reverse search.
We find disarticulated bones. Sometimes we find whole fossils there together. But massive dinosaur graveyards.
Yeah, too bad they aren't all in catastrophically deposited stone, though, isn't it?
What these bones do not come with are tags that say, wow, look at me, I'm 65 million years old.
Nor should they. Those fossils were somewhere closer to 150 million years old, because the Morrison Formation is 163.5 to 145 million years old.
We don't find tags like that. No. You see, age is actually a bit of an interpretation.
In the same way that all information must be interpreted, yes, but that doesn't mean you can make up whatever ages you want. There are things that are measured, and they are not open to infinite possibilities. The possibilities are constrained by the measurement itself and the laws of physics.
We find dinosaur bones in 3 particular rock layers: Cretaceous, Jurassic, and Triassic.
Bodie, you blusterous bonehead. Those aren't individual rock layers. They're whole periods, which are divided into epochs, which are then further divided into stages, each of which is made up of multiple formations, which themselves are made up of multiple members. Only at the member level do we get to something that could reasonably be called an individual layer, and even then, if you count laminae rather than strata, you're still looking at multiple layers. Words have meaning, and you can't just make up whatever meaning strikes your fancy for technical terms in science.
Now let me explain something about these rock layers. Because creationists and evolutionists, we all agree on the rock layers.
Well, most of the big names in creationism agree, but not all of them. Kent Hovind, for example, agrees that rock layers exist, but flat out denies that they form any kind of stratigraphic column, or that labels like Triassic or Cretaceous have any meaning.
There really is a Cambrian rock layer. There really is a Cretaceous rock layer. Where we disagree is the timing about how long it took to lay them down. Now, of course, these numbers vary all the time, by the way.
Just like way back in the beginning when he complained about our increasingly accurate estimates for the age of the universe, this is just Bodie once again complaining that science doesn't just dogmatically stick to the first estimate they get, rather than trying to refine measurements to be more accurate and precise.
But we're looking at these, in the secular world, they assume that these rock layers were laid down slowly and gradually over millions and billions of years.
No, that's not an assumption, that's a physical necessity for things like limestone, most shale, etc. In other cases, such as, say, tuff or turbidites, geologists are well aware that those rocks were laid down rapidly. Again, until creationists get on those sedimentology experiments, They have literally no counter to the consensus of geologists.
You see, they've left the Bible out of it.
No, it wasn't ever relevant. If the interpretation of the Bible that Bodie favors were true, then whether or not the Bible were used, the evidence would point to a global flood. That no one comes to that conclusion without first assuming, prior to evidence being examined, that Bodie's version of the Bible is historically accurate, is damning evidence that there simply is no reason to believe in the flood of Noah. Science doesn't care about any holy text, whether the Bible or any other. If science agrees with such a text, then that's cool, but if it doesn't, it's time for believers to either reinterpret their text or abandon it. I don't care which they do, but we have already seen Christians do this with geocentrism, which is now a fringe position among Christians.
We're looking at the exact same rock layers, thinking in terms of a massive worldwide global flood over the course of about a year, which lays down the majority of these rock layers, boom, quickly.
Death Valley, California, famously the hottest place on Earth, is full of evaporites. That is, minerals that were dissolved in water. These are mostly recent, but the thing is that the whole geological column has evaporites at various places and depths. How do you account for this under a global flood? The very opposite of what causes evaporites. Or take limestone, which has a maximum growth rate of only a few centimeters per millennium, and yet there are limestone deposits that are scores or even hundreds of meters tall. The actual geology of Earth absolutely precludes the young Earth creationist interpretation of Earth history.
Same rock layers, same evidence, same dinosaur bones, two different interpretations of that.
It's not the same evidence, though, because creationists routinely just ignore whole swaths of data when it's inconvenient. Because get this, they're pseudoscientists.
And see, like I said, I'm starting with the Bible. I want God to be that absolute authority. That's the way I want to look at these rock layers.
So, not scientifically then. Glad it's being stated so bluntly. Remember, empirical data are the standard for determining what science is. God doesn't factor into it, whether there is a God or not. If there's a God and the Bible is true the way Bodie and his pals at AIG interpret it, then great, the evidence will support that no matter if you start with the Bible or not. It just turns out that when you look at the data, they preclude rather than support the hypothesis that Bodie supports.
So, dinosaurs. These three rock layers, boom, flood sediment. Noah and the animals represented on the ark are floating around,
being cooked alive while their cells are ripped apart by 4 billion years of ionizing radiation condensed into just a year. Fun times.
While these rock layers are being laid down. They were existing at the same time.
If only the rocks had any evidence of that.
But I want you to notice something. This idea of millions and billions of years is gone in light of a global flood. It's gone. Notice, it's gone.
Yeah, because it's tautological that if you don't allow for billions of years, then you won't conclude that billions of years have passed. The fact that young Earth creationism is tautological in many ways is neither news, nor is it exactly a point in its favor.
It's just not there. And that's significant. If I were to go out and write a technical paper for a secular journal like Science or Nature, Scientific American, and argue for a global flood, the paper would be thrown out right away. No, we can't have a global flood.
Not if you could support it with actual evidence, but you can't. That's the thing. Geology was mostly worked out by Christians who would have been deeply happy to find evidence of a global flood, like Charles Lyell, who wanted to divorce science from reliance on Genesis, and who was also a devout Christian his whole life. He hoped that the truth of the Bible would be evident without circular reasoning. He also believed that, based on the evidence, the flood was so tranquil that it left no trace, although he still believed in the flood of Noah. I think that's enough for today's video. Next time, we'll hear more about the flood. Well, if you enjoyed the video, hit like and tell me in the comments. If you didn't, feel free to hit dislike and tell me what the problem was in the comments. Either way, please remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you're always notified when I have more content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Tovind, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Elron Teller, Phil Havara, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostick Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Monkey They Them, Mrs. Spexinder, Sphincter of Doom, and the Venerable Bede. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out to the general public. Thanks for watching.